Good afternoon, everyone. We're going to go ahead and get started with our Education and Culture Committee meeting. I want to welcome everyone. It's the first time we've been up here in 7th floor in a while, but we have some good news to share, and so it's always good to come together with great things. So our first item on the agenda is our FY23 capital budget supplemental appropriation and amendment to our CIP, or Capital Improvements Program, in the amount of $12 million. It's a major capital project. And this is about Neillsville Middle School, which we all know incredibly well. I was just talking with Councilmember Duando, who was just there with his daughter. I know this school intimately. I've spoken at a number of their commencement celebrations as they matriculate on to high school, but have also been there with the parents and the PTA when Dr. Smith was still superintendent there, talking about the conditions at the school and how important it was for us to make sure that we had this project to move forward. I want to thank the county executive and his team, Ms. Jawa, who's here from Office of Management and Budget. Thank you so much for all of your great work, and of course the hard and tireless work of MCPS, who continues to advocate for every single project, understanding that they're all important, but we know that some rise to the level of these need to be done first, and this is certainly one of those that falls in that category. So I did just want to thank you all for your partnership. Ms. Karamias, who is our Director of Division of Capital Planning and Real Estate for Montgomery County Public Schools. I don't see Mr. Adams. I don't think he's going to be here with us today, but is the Director of Department of Facilities Management. So this one should be very quick. I'm going to turn it over to Ms. Rodriguez-Hernandez in a moment to just walk us through the packet. But as always, want to thank you for doing your great work as our legislative analyst for MCPS. And so with that, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Chair Rice, and a thank you to Ms. McGuire, who couldn't be here with us today for this meeting. So as you mentioned, we have a supplemental appropriation of $12 million for Neillsville Middle School. It is put across 3 years, $2 million in FY23, $8 million in FY24, an additional $2 million in FY25. This is a high priority project for MCPS and the county, and this has already been recommended by the county executive as well. The Council will hear a public hearing and consider testimony and action on the supplemental on July 12th. Of course, based on the chair's discretion, if after public hearing we want to return for any future conversations, we can schedule that as well. And that's the gist of it. You know, the need for the $12 million is related to increase in escalation construction costs. We received the construction bids during reconciliation of the FY23 to 28 CIP process and FY23 operating budget this year, so we weren't able to incorporate this during that conversation, but we're coming to it now due to the high priority need and the increased costs for this project.
Well, thank you very much. Ms. Karamias, did you have anything that you wanted to add?
No, that's it. Thank you.
All right, my colleagues? All right, so without objection, we are approved. Excellent. All right.
Go Neillsville.
That certainly is the quickest $12 million. Some of these are no-brainers that don't require any work from us. So thank you very much. All right, we're going to move on to our next item, which is an Office of Legislative Oversight report on our community use of public facilities. And so I'm going to turn to my colleagues because I know they may have some opening comments on this. But certainly this is a follow-up on our operating budget discussion that we had a little bit over a month ago, where we were discussing some of the challenges that CUP is feeling and that we know that our community is feeling as well, and just trying to figure out how best for us to move forward to ensure that we have these great public facilities that can be used by those in our community, but also with the priorities that we know are incredibly important to us. For so many who find it difficult to find space, you know, I had an opportunity to work with our only predominantly Asian American girls basketball team, as you were talking about basketball, Councilmember Duando, and had a chance to talk to the coach and some of the students about the challenges that they face in terms of really being pushed to the side because public facilities are oftentimes prioritized for some of your more well-known traditional sports. And as you go down, if you will, in terms of what we've deemed as priorities and then go to some of the others, typically a lot of girl sports, and then some of the lesser known sports, archery. I was just at Clarksburg High School and Rocky Hill Middle School where they're doing archery, and then that falls below basketball team, below soccer, below all the other things that might have to utilize the gym, volleyball and others. And so from that standpoint, it's always good to just understand what some of the best ways we can move forward on this are. And that's where Office of Legislative Oversight always comes into play. Being able to help us think outside of the box about how to best move forward to ensure that we're really getting to the mission of this community use of public facilities. So I'm going to turn to Councilmember Navarro first, because I know that she was instrumental in terms of promoting the affordability aspect and really ensuring that some of our community entities had access to these facilities at an affordable price. And then I'll turn to Councilmember Joando. So Councilmember Navarro.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to Olo for this particular study. I think it's important to remember that when we had the conversation that then resulted in the program to subsidize particular uses, the broader conversation had to do with just taking a step back to evaluate this extraordinary asset that we have, which are our public facilities, and the incredible demand, but and also how do we align that with many of the county's policy goals. And this was a while back, and so I think it would be important not only for us today, but I think also going forward, to think through this with the same lens as we think through things like the use of, sort of the feasibility studies that we have done for co-location of affordable housing. We just made a decision with, for example, the Chevy Chase Library to co-locate affordable housing there. And to me, this is how I view public facilities as well. There's definitely a finite resource. We have, growing needs. We have identified some very important policy areas for the county. Many of those policy areas are aligned with our Racial Equity and Social Justice Act. And, but I feel like if we continue to just, treat, this notion of public facilities as it is right now, we will never be able to truly leverage that resource. It will always be more and more and more difficult for us to get to that point where we're really addressing at scale many of these issues. So I just wanted to throw that example of how we are looking at things like co-location in libraries and maybe rec centers and things like that. I would like for us to use that type of lens, and I don't know if in the future this means legislation for the utilization of CUF, so it can be aligned with what the county has deemed to be, urgent policy directives in order for us to address many of the disparities that we have. So that's just my overall just take on what I think should be some of the next steps. But I really do thank you for this particular report, and for some of the things that are included in there as recommendations. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Councilmember Navarro. And as I turn to Councilmember Joando, I did want to invite, I see Ms. Ramona Bell Pearson, the Director of Community Use and Public Facilities, is here, so I'd like to invite you up. I'm not sure if Mr. Pullman or Mr. Davis want to come up as well. Ms. Karamias, if you'd like to come up representing Montgomery County Public Schools, or Ms. Hill, either one. And then MNC PPC, I don't see Director Riley here, but I know that Cliff and Haviz were supposed to be here as well. So please, you can come up if you'd like to, so that if we do have questions, you'll be there to answer them, so we can have you already here ready to go. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Councilmember Joando for some opening remarks, and then I'll turn it to you, Mr. DeFazio.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good afternoon, everybody. I really appreciate OLO's work on this. As the junior member of the committee, I always like context and the history of, and this is really helpful as far as kind of talking about where we've been, and as Councilmember Navarro and Rice have both said, where we might go. This is a critical component. Top 5 list of what should government do for you is letting us use spaces to have recreation, to have our programming, to have weddings, to do whatever, all the great things that happen in all of our facilities. So excited to talk about it. I know can be complicated, but we're all trying to achieve the same thing, which is have the best process that serves our residents the best and is functioning and work and allows us to work well together. So I'm looking forward to reviewing this and then digging into the what I know will be hard work to how to make this work going forward, and appreciate the work that's gone into this. So good to see everybody. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Well, thank you very much, Councilmember Giwando. You know, and you actually said something that I think is incredibly important that I hope that people, and I don't want to get too political here, but as we get into elections, it's really going to be important for institutional knowledge. As Councilmember Giwando said, you know, Councilmember Navarro and I will be rotating off of the council, and even just understanding the history and everything that goes on that happens with this council and why decisions are made are going to be incredibly important. So we hope, Councilmember Giwando, that you'll be able to carry some of that institutional knowledge into the next term. It's going to be incredibly important for us as we continue to focus on these kinds of things and continue to build on the successes that we've had and also figure out where we can improve and do things a little bit differently, right? We don't want to reinvent the wheel and start all over from scratch once again all the time when we do this. We want to make sure that we're building on all of the great conversations and successes and the advancements that we've had. And that's what this OLO report is designed to do. And so it's a perfect segue into you, place to take us away. So I'll turn it over to you, sir.
All right, good afternoon. Mike's not out. I'm sorry. I apologize. Thank you. I haven't been here in a while. It's been a while. I forgot. I know. It's been years. Okay. All right. I'll start again with the Today's presentation has 3 parts. First, a brief overview of CUF. Second, major report findings. And third, OLO recommendations and discussion items. First, I'm going to give an overview of CUF, including its history and core functions. Community use of public facilities was originally created in 1978 by the School and Facilities Utilization Act to maximize the use of Montgomery Public Schools and to permit the use of public schools. The Act also created the Interagency Coordinating Board, who set and approved CUF policy. The board consists of members from the County Executive's Office, council staff, MCPS, Maryland National Capital Park and Planning Commission, Montgomery College, and county residents. Over time, CUF was charged with also maximizing the use of government facilities and before and after school child care placement at schools. In sum, according to the county code, CUF has 4 core functions. 1, facilitate the public use of MCPS schools. 2, facilitate the public use of government facilities. 3, facilitate the placement of before and after school child care. And 4, support the Interagency Coordinating Board. Turning to OLO's major report findings. I'll first describe the subject area each finding is based on, including CUF organization, financial management, fee subsidies, and the before and after school child care selection process. Then I'll follow each subject area with OLO's findings. Okay, so here's all the 4 areas. So first, I'm going to review CUF's organization. CUF manages scheduling for both schools and government facilities. CUF's primary role is scheduling users at facilities, creating the permits, and collecting the fees. CUF operates as an enterprise fund, with the collected fees covering the $8.5 million budget without assistance from other funds. CUF currently employs 34 positions across 5 divisions: core services or scheduling, finance, the Silver Spring Civic Building, information technology, and weekend and evening supervisors. Although CUF is a public-facing department, it does not currently have an active position dedicated to communications. Within the 34 positions, 2 are MCPS detailed weekend and evening supervisors who ensure access to facilities and give assistance to after-hours issues. The placement of these positions is dictated by an old MOU between MCPS and CUF. The MOU is overdue for an update on staffing and other pertinent issues. As for Parks, prior to 2021, 2 program specialists from Parks were detailed to CUF, coordinating scheduling of fields with CUF staff. That MOU expired and Parks staff moved back to Parks offices, with little to no communication with CUF. OLO has 3 major findings regarding CUF's organization. For the first one, CUF's structure is an outlier when compared to other jurisdictions. OLO reviewed facility scheduling in 4 other jurisdictions and found they either have a department within an agency managing the use of government facilities or school facilities, but not both. And additionally, CUF was the only one supported by enterprise funds, while the other jurisdictions are supported by general funds, focusing on providing services and not covering costs. The second major finding from CUF organization is that CUF's communication needs improvement. A common theme from those interviewed was issues with external and internal communications. This includes lack of responsiveness, follow-through or following up does not always happen, unclear information provided by staff, the website was inconsistent, outdated information, there are silos within the department, and a lack of guidance. As for staff handling communications, CUF only had an inactive or lapsed program specialist handling communications. Other public-facing departments of the county have at least one higher-level communications position. The third major finding from CUF organization is that there are no long-term MOUs with MCPS and MNC PPC, or especially the Parks Department within that. Although CUF and MCPS just got a temporary MOU to make reimbursement payments, there is a need to address mutual obligations and operational issues such as staffing, security, permanent enforcement, and principal involvement. A new MOU is also needed between Parks and CUF to help provide consistency for field scheduling. CUF and Parks are currently in talks for a new MOU. Now for the second topic, I'm going to discuss CUF's financial management. CUF's budget is built by the fees it charges users, but it must reimburse MCPS for the school wear and tear by the public based on the volume of use. 65% of CUF's budget is dedicated towards reimbursing MCPS for the cost of public use, including utilities, custodial supplies, equipment, maintenance, and staff services. However, Montgomery Parks does not receive reimbursement payments based on the use of athletic fields, but they do annually receive $300,000 from CUF's enterprise fund and $2 million from the county government general obligation bonds as part of the capital improvement program for MCPS field maintenance. CUF had significant fund balances starting in FY14 through FY19 with a high of $6.9 million. This prompted a spend down of the fund balance by the Interagency Coordinating Board for community investments such as Parks renovating MCPS fields and improvements at the Silver Spring Civic Building. These large amounts of CUF balance in the recent years before the pandemic was a cause of concern for the Interagency Coordinating Board and county officials. They wanted to know the proper user rates without creating such a large fund balance. This increased the need for a fee study to determine the fair rates to charge users. The last fee study was performed in 2002. An RFP was initiated in FY19 for a fee study, but it did not yield qualified applicants. For a department dependent on users paying fees for facility space, COVID-19 cut CUF revenues drastically and has taken CUF until mid-FY22 to finally cover expenses. Revenues dipped to $3.3 million in FY21, down from a high of $6.9 million in FY17, when targeted drawdowns for community investments began. To meet smaller revenues, CUF had to remove funding for 5 positions and cut operating expenses. CUF also couldn't pay the FY21 MCPS reimbursement payments, which MCPS waived. CUF has recently rebounded enough to make the FY22 MCPS reimbursement payments. As for the OLO finding on financial management, a CUF fee study is sorely needed. CUF has a complex fee structure with a need for a simpler structure that users can understand. Furthermore, CUF needs to determine the proper balance between the right level of user fees and a prudent fund balance, so users are charged an appropriate fee. As an update, CUF has recently restarted the RFP process with a goal of it being posted in the fall. CUF is currently using summer fellows to collect regional fee data. Now for the third topic, I'll discuss how CUF assists the disadvantaged through fee subsidies. CUF provides facility reservation financial assistance through the Community Access and the Facility Fee Assistance programs. The Community Access program is traditionally funded at $150,000 and helps increase opportunities to groups, organizations, and community members using the Silver Spring Civic Building. The Facility Fee Assistance program is traditionally funded at $75,000 and addresses the needs of groups that directly benefit vulnerable and at-risk youth or limited income individuals and their families. The Facility Fee Assistance Program also received $500,000 in federal funds in FY21 during the pandemic to expand the availability of youth sports, with all funds successfully distributed. Due to the success of the federal funds distribution, CUF also received $125,000 in additional federal funds in FY21 for the Facility Fee Assistance Program. As for the finding on facility reservations assistance, OLO observed that CUF has run an effective program, but it needs some adjustments. When reviewing other jurisdictions' programs, no others were as transparent as the CUF programs. Other programs did not have subsidy information on their websites, and users had to call them to find out about assistance. Before the pandemic, CUF distributed most of the funds for the Community Access Program and Facility Fee Assistance Program. As previously noted, during the pandemic, CUF successfully distributed the FY21 additional $500,000 allotment for youth sports, and it's still in the process right now of distributing the additional $125,000 it received. Although program users were generally satisfied, they did mention that the programs can be more efficient. This would include making applications and changes to the programs more apparent on the website. They also mentioned that faster processing for applications would be valuable, so groups with limited funds can plan their spending. Turning to assistance for before and after school childcare families. Unlike other jurisdictions studied, there's no direct assistance programs for low-income families through CUF. However, families can apply for vouchers through the State of Maryland's Child Care Scholarship and the Working Parents Assistance Program through the Department of Health and Human Services. Both providers and families have indicated that the voucher process is cumbersome. HHS representatives said they are working on improvements. Providers can also help, such as a scholarship or a discount. Overall, it's been difficult keeping providers at Title I and high farm schools. Although there's a need, families can't pay the full fees and providers can't cover their costs, forcing them to leave. Over the past 4 years, 6 Title I elementary schools lost their before and after school child care providers. As for the finding on before and after school child care assistance, OLO observed good examples by other jurisdictions that the county could potentially implement directly through before and after school administrator. These examples include providing a sliding scale for fees, free care for all students, and providing a scholarship program. The free use in Fresno County was highly supported by aggressively pursuing federal 21st century grants, which are administered through states, and aid dedicated for before and after school programs, with an emphasis on education services for low-income students. These grants are used by some organizations in the county, and MCPS has received a 3-year grant in 2020. However, more grants can be administered by the county and MCPS. When talking to MCPS, they did note that more staff would be needed if more grants were pursued. Finally, for the fourth topic, I'll discuss before and after school childcare. Before and after school childcare is delivered by licensed childcare providers at MCPS elementary schools and a few middle schools. The before and after school childcare program is delivered by providers at 115 MCPS schools by 15 childcare providers. 65% of the schools are served by 3 providers: Barty, Kids After Hours, and KidsCo. CUF has administered the before and after school child care selection process since 1986. It has been governed by an executive regulation. CUF performs a quasi-procurement process to select providers every 7 years, with nonprofit providers getting scoring preference according to state law. The selection process has been on hold since the fall of 2018 due to 2 reasons. The first one is conflicting litigation contesting the validity of the process, especially regarding giving sufficient priority to nonprofit providers. In one case, the judge ruled in favor of the nonprofit provider, and in the other case, the judge ruled in favor of CUF. The second reason is the executive regulation expired in 2019, and this gave CUF and MCPS an opportunity to revise the regulation. As for the OLO finding on before and after school childcare selection, it is important to note that although it was originally a core function of CUF within the county code, the childcare selection process is currently under MCPS's purview. Without an executive regulation in place, the responsibility currently falls back to MCPS. Currently, CUF only provides subject matter assistance. MCPS is currently finalizing an RFP for early childcare at school centers, and they plan on using it as a template for before and after school childcare. However, new schools who have a need for before and after school childcare have not been addressed since the selection process was paused in December 2018. Although the process is currently not with CUF, stakeholders provided changes for whomever administers the program in the future. Prominent themes include changing the before and after school childcare selection process to a more formal process, creating more standards for childcare programs so everyone has a level playing field, and viewing before and after school childcare as part of out-of-school time activities. Providers state that they provide impactful programs just like the county programs. Now turning to the before and after school childcare selection case studies. Case studies were chosen based on location, similar requirements, and challenges identified by stakeholders. The review is highly focused on Maryland counties since they have similar requirements as Montgomery County, such as providing preference to nonprofit providers when school committees are scoring applications and interviews. OLO also focused on Orange County, Florida because it's a larger county with similar challenges. Finally, OLO examined Fairfax County, Virginia for comparison purposes. Its county-run program uses county employees to provide before and after school childcare. It does not select the providers. As for the finding on before and after school childcare selection process case studies, OLO observed that other jurisdictions utilize formalized processes and minimize principal involvement. In particular, found that all used an RFP. A procurement department conducted the bid for all the case studies. Again, principals are not required to be involved in the selection process, except for Orange County, Florida. However, school staff are involved in some capacity. Bid cycles varied from 5 years to as needed. CUF has used 7 years. 2 Maryland counties exclusively select nonprofit providers, Baltimore and Frederick. Of note, the Fairfax County-run program, principals are not involved in the before and after school child care operations, and they use dedicated school space. Overall, this report includes 4 recommendations and 2 discussion items. The first recommendation is to reclassify the program specialist who handles CUF outreach and communications to Community Outreach Manager to improve CUF's internal and external communications. Based on stakeholder comments, CUF desperately needs to address its internal and external communications. However, compared to other departments who communicate regularly with the public, CUF lacks the proper position and grade to address the department's communication needs. As an update, this recommendation was approved by the Council in the FY23 approved operating budget. The second recommendation is to create an all-encompassing guidebook on everything related to community use. CUF's information for stakeholders is currently scattered through its website pages and in the interagency coordinating board packets. In order to find everything easily, other jurisdictions have an easy-to-follow guidebook that details procedures, hours of operation, safety and security, and general standards requirements. As an update, CUF is going to plan this guidebook with a committee that also consists of parks and recreation departments. The third recommendation is to perform the before and after school child care selection with a request for proposals through a procurement office, either through the county or MCPS. Like other jurisdictions studied, a formal process can specifically outline the applying child care provider's expectations, costs to the county or MCPS, ranges of fees for students, and standardized guidelines for providers. The fourth recommendation is to consider a comprehensive study that goes beyond the proposed RFP fee study from 2019. Beyond the fee study, more can be explored to solidify CUF, including what would need to change to create a uniform user group across facilities, what would fees look like if a reduced or free use was accounted for in the fee schedule, whether the current reimbursement setup is efficient, or whether MCPS and the county should have their own separate community use departments like other jurisdictions. As for discussion items, the first one is to determine what type of department CUF should be. Is it solely an enterprise department? Or is it providing a public service such as libraries and fees are not expected to cover all costs? Providing free use or reduced fees have been at odds with balancing the budget solely using enterprise funds. Similar jurisdictions such as Fairfax County Public Schools, Orange County Public Schools, or Loudoun County Public Schools, are general fund based. They do not charge fees, but the fees are not intended to completely cover all their expenses. The second discussion item is to consider all options available to address affordable before and after school childcare. Examples including removing facility fees at high farm schools, with providers adhering to lower rates, creating county assistance directly through the before and after school childcare program administrator, providing before and after school transportation, and applying for more school or county administered federal 21st century grants. And again, you need additional staff for that. Thank you. This concludes the presentation, and I'm going to turn the discussion back to the committee chair.
Well, Mr. DeFazio, you certainly did not disappoint, let me tell you. This is great information, as always, what we expect from the Office of Legislative Oversight in terms of thinking. A lot of the discussion around some of those points are ones that we've had for a number of years in terms of where we want to go, in terms of what our Office of Community Use in Public Facilities truly should be. Should it continue to be enterprise? And Ms. Yao knows all too well, as staff who's been working on this. You've heard us go back and forth about many of these topics for a long time, but I do feel as though it's time. But at this point, I do want to turn to our Director of Community Use in Public Facilities. Ms. Bell Pearson, you've had an opportunity to hear some of the Office of Legislative Oversight recommendations and discussion items, but certainly wanted to turn to you for some of your thoughts in terms of what you see as the future of the entity itself, and if you want to respond to any of the things that Office of Legislative Oversight has brought up as well. Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Councilmember Rice. I'd also like to thank Mr. DeFazio and the Office of Legislative Oversight. They met with us extensively. They gave us plenty of opportunities for input. We do appreciate that. And then met with us with the Deputy CAO to get some explanation once the report came out. So that was very helpful to us. I will also say, as an overview, two very positive things have already come out of this experience. One being the fact that we were able to both of us had to dedicate a lot of time to actually sit down with MCPS. MCPS did as we did, to sit down and finally come up with a document that we would be able to agree to operate under for the next year. That was very imperative to us because we had the end of the fiscal year coming. We did have funds available based on the comeback of permitting and the fact that our community was very great to come back to us and to trust us for their safety and security. And we wanted to be sure and give the funds to the reimbursement that was owed during the fiscal year when we had them. And next fiscal year, we're hoping things are going to continue. We have some reports from OMB that go both directions because they're trying to anticipate the possibility of another slowdown or changes in our permitting abilities, but we knew we had the money this year, so we were able to do it. The second positive thing I will address is having a conversation with Mr. Riley, who was very gracious to call me and say, we need to get this going with regard to the discussions on the MOU. Again, that was a situation just like with MCPS where everybody's been off doing their own thing, trying to handle the pandemic, trying to deal with all the different new normals that are existing now. But we have made some great strides. We've agreed to not only discuss the MOU, we anticipate it's probably going to be a little different than it was before. Some of it will be because of updates needed and some of it will be operational issues. The other issue that we discussed at length was the pending fee study, because we all have the interest in understanding where the fees should be, understanding what we need for maintenance and continued operations of fields in particular, as well as, facilities. So we have had discussions about combining our interests, possibly doing a rider on the contract that we get with the bid, hopefully, that will allow parks to partner with us to get the study done and add some of their own terms and conditions. So those are two positive things I'll point to immediately. With regard to the child care, which is another something I think I can address without taking too much time, we have been in discussion with MCPS for some time now. They are at the point where they have drafted or in the process of drafting through their procurement office a model for use of the programs. They have a few programs they run in their schools that are early child care centers. And they anticipate that once they get that RFP developed and advertised, that they'll be able to do lessons learned and just roll it out a little bit more to be actually effective for before and after care. So there's definitely a plan and agreement of the parties for it to be handled through the MCPS Procurement Office. Obviously, CUF is going to continue to be involved because we have the subject matter expertise. And by that, I mean we would be acting just like if county's procurement were to do a contract and needed outside consultants, they can bring them in under contract. So we would be doing something like that. We're going to be striving very strongly to keep the connection there, but to make it an arm's length connection, because from a litigation standpoint, we've always been very clear with the court, it's not our program, it's MCPS program. We have a delegation to help them once we get the permitting stage and once they're in the schools. So that's something that I see as very positive that we're moving forward on. I know there's been a long delay since 2018, but a lot of things have happened since 2018 that have slowed it. So we have not been, it's not that we haven't been meeting and discussing how we think things should go, it's just we haven't been able to give it our full attention, and we haven't been able to come to any final decisions because so many things were changing. But now I think we're at a point where we'll be able to make some progress. I think there was also a discussion about communication. I will say the communication has been a difficult thing for us because we have had a lot of changes going on, not just the pandemic, but we have been changing our software system as has Parks and Rec. And in doing so, we've had to have various levels of communication at different times, and sometimes quiet periods where we didn't know what was going to happen in terms of what the policy would be or what the actual permitting process, final permitting process would look like from a online cloud-based database system. We are now live ever since May 1st or May 2nd, I believe, of this year. And as of June 22nd, which was like last Tuesday, I think, we have transferred everything over to VSI, which is RecTrack. And the significance of that is there were quite a few permits that were in there through the end of the school year, which we did not want to mess with, basically. And the school year just ended around the 22nd, 23rd, so we were able to discontinue anything on active at that point and move everything totally to VSI. So we're now operating there. You may hear from constituents that there are some growing pains. That happens quite a bit, and we're not going to say it's not, but we are making great strides to communicate. We've been very active with our blog, which is the Community Bridge. We also have a lot of information out there on the web page when you go to the CUF web page. Mr. DeFazio's analysis is correct. There are a lot of locations where information is sitting or living. And some of that is because as policies were developed, they were developed through ICB, so they ended up there. There were some through our facility use license agreement, so it ends up there. So there's various things. What I had suggested to Mr. DeFazio that I'm going to be suggesting to the ICB as a result of his report, which our next meeting will be July 20th, is that we develop a subcommittee within the ICB that will look at our communication plan, not only from the standpoint of what CUF would be doing, but because the ICB contains the Board of Ed, the Recreation is there as an advisory, the Planning Commission chair is there, we have Superintendent of Schools, we have the college, Montgomery College president, so we have the opportunity to have input from all of the sources that provide some form of community use. So it makes more sense to me if we're going to be doing something that we do it collaboratively. So that would be our plan. Obviously, that's not going to be an overnight thing, but the intent is that we would start by pulling what we can pull together now from the various locations we know, and then improve upon that. So that's how we're going to be hopefully addressing that. Trying to think if there's the issue also with communications was the classification of the actual existing program. We had someone in that position that was attempting to provide those services, and during the pandemic we lost that staff member, and then the position was frozen, so we haven't been able to renew that. But we do anticipate that the position's going to be unfrozen when we get to the FY23 budget, and I understand that council has supported the increase. What I have to do now is consult with the CAO, because as of today there has been a freeze placed on upward classifications. So there are possibilities for exemptions, but it's important to understand what his plan is overall before I can commit, one way or the other. But we obviously appreciate the support of OLO making the recommendation and of council in passing the funds, the appropriation. So we will be working to try to make that happen. I think I got everything. So obviously I'm available for any questions. Also, I have two staff members here that work with our grant program, both of whom work with the facility fee assistance. Well, Mr. Davis actually manages the facility fee assistance program, and Mr. Pullman works with him as his manager, and then Mr. Pullman and Mr. Davis together do the child care. So we thought it would be instrumental for you to hear from them if necessary. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Ms. Bell-Pearson. And let me just start off. I'm going to turn to my colleagues, Councilmember Navarro, then Councilmember Jawando, and I have a number of questions. But I did just want to ask one general overarching before I turn to Councilmember Navarro, and she may delve into this a little bit more. But I know the blueprint for Maryland's Future talked about sliding scale and talked about subsidies that are there. How is that encompassed in terms of CUPF and what it is that we do with before and after childcare, understanding that that's now coming into fruition?
Sure. I had looked at that when we began working with a group that is a work group that is looking at out-of-school time. We're working collaboratively with MCPS as they have a similar work group, and we also are working within the county. Primarily with HHS as well as recreation and other departments. That has successfully been a public-private type of work group because Collaboration Council and Children's Opportunity Fund have been very strong partners with us. When we looked at the blueprint, we thought that the work we were doing probably most appropriately fit in the more resources to ensure that all students are successful. There are other areas we probably overlap into, but specifically that one because it talks about the goals of before and after care supports for students. And we are trying to establish a sustainable program that would allow the county to continue year after year, not just when we're in a pandemic or have specific federal funding or state funding for that purpose, but to be able to support the out-of-school time in a way that is instructive, socializing, has maybe even a mental health component because, as we've seen, mental health is something that has been very much spotlighted as a result of what we've gone through recently. Unfortunately, it's always been with us, but it's now becoming very appropriate to discuss, I guess is the best way I can say it. So that's what we're doing, and we're trying to understand where that work group will best fit. I've had conversations with HHS because they're a logical home. And in particular, their Positive Youth Development Initiative has been initially developed for the purpose of being positive supports in the community for youths. Because we've seen some issues and incidents in the school system that are related to aggressive behavior or some may say violence, and it's my understanding from speaking with the Positive Youth Development as well as with Ms. Treadvance, that they're trying to restructure positive youth development and so that it's more, instead of seen as reactive and going into communities to deal with harm or trauma or whatever incident they're going to related to violence, that it would be more of a positive support system. So from that standpoint, it looked like a good home for the work group. I also don't want to lose, however, the momentum we have with the public-private, which is the Collaboration Council. They are the local management board, and we'll have state funding associated with that. And they were a good resource to our work group by providing funding for the Forum for Youth Investment, which is an outside agency that is acting as a consultant to our group. And we've been very successful in working with them. And Collaboration Council is ready, willing, and able to take on the responsibility. They work very closely with recreation, which is also a very strong part of this. So I guess all of that to say there are a lot of collaborations that need to be considered before we understand how best to structure this. I have had conversations with Ms. Yao about her ideas because she's been on our work group and working with us to give us input from the council and to keep you updated as to what was going on. I'm sorry. Before I go further, I made an oversight before I yielded the floor earlier. I wanted to introduce you to our summer fellows who are here. All right, do you want to stand up and just introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Isaac Fox. I am going to be a second year last year of policy student at the University of Maryland. I'm social policy. It's something I want to talk about. East studies
And I'm Natalie, and I'm a rising second year, also a PP student at Worksession University, and primarily into education policy, environmental policy, and I'm also
Thank you.
Fantastic.
They've been with us for about, 4 weeks now? Mr. Davis is managing their program, and we've been very pleased. They're asking really good questions and doing some good research for us.
Well, that's excellent. I know that all of our summer fellows have done an amazing job really highlighting and working in conjunction, and oftentimes at very similar levels to what we see from Office of Legislative Oversight. No offense, Mr. DeFazio, but certainly ones in which are right there in line. So that's really good. So very excited to see what reports you bring forth as well. I'm going to turn to Councilmember Navarro. I have a number of questions, including one overarching one. I did just want to caution the committee as a whole and all of us, as I began the discussion and talked about what is before us. We do have an election that will be in a few weeks. And at that point, we will see what direction this county is going to continue to head in, or possibly go in other directions, depending. It all depends. We have new council members that are going to be on board. We may have a new county executive. We may not. Which will shape a lot of this that happens. And so from that perspective, what I don't want to do is have us spend a lot of time in something that may then go in a different direction depending on where folks may be. And who knows, folks may come in new and still want to go in this direction. At the same time, I don't want to lose momentum and the ability for us to start preparing for this fall when we know it is incredibly important. And we heard that highlighted from some of the great things that, as I turn to Councilmember Navarro, she's been championing, which is through positive youth development, and especially when it comes to high school wellness centers and the aspects of what's going to happen within our school system, especially for some of our at-promise youth. And so from that standpoint, there's a lot that's still floating out there, and I think that dust will settle soon, and then will give us a little bit more certainty about what it is that we need to do as some of our next steps, some of which are very structural and some of which are easy, as you had said, Ms. Bell-Pearson, and you guys have already started moving forward with. So just wanted to kind of shape that as the chair from some of the perspective in terms of guidance of where we want to go from this. Of course, we're not making any hard, fast decisions today. Today is a discussion, but at the same time can help us to start thinking about what some of those decision points may be. So with that, turn it over to Councilmember Navarro.
Thank you. Yeah, and actually, the more I was listening to the presentation, the more I realized that this perhaps should have been a joint government operations and education and culture committee, and perhaps this is what we should do next time, because there might be some areas that need to be considered that are contained in this report. I think it's important to, something I have become more and more mindful as an elected official. I think it's so important for us to, not address these issues which have been so complex and which have a strong and very long history in a perspective that is just like, this is how we've done it, these are some of the things that perhaps we can do, without taking into consideration what we have just experienced. We have just experienced an extraordinary period of time where changes have taken place that have completely shifted the direction and the trajectory of so many policy areas and so many different social policy specific areas in ways that we never ever even could have imagined. And I know that as I reflect about my service on the county council, no doubt that the last 3 years have been really transformational. And so I am constantly looking at things that come before us through that lens, because I think it would be irresponsible for us to look at issues through the lens pre-2020, because it's not the same world. out there, right? And so the decisions that we make are going to hopefully begin to set the stage to address what's actually happening out there in the community. And so, so again, as I'm listening to the report, that discussion item about determining what type of department CUF should be, I think it's central to this conversation. I think that is the first sort of, if it's a decision tree, I think that's the first decision we all collectively have to make at this point in time. Because it is true that the county has changed so dramatically. And we have all been really busy putting forth, I think, some important programs out there, initiatives, talked about, the Children Opportunity Fund, where it's connected to the Early Care and Education Initiative, which is connected to school readiness, which is connected to K through 12, which is connected to so many of those disparities that we want to address. Well, we know, because we saw it in the Early Care and Education Initiative, that the issue of space is so important. And in there, we vowed that we were going to look at everything, right? The same goes with things like after school care, before and after, or any kind of positive youth development, especially now after this pandemic. I mean, we did make a groundbreaking decision to expand wellness centers to all high schools because we had to act, we had to do something. And so I guess that would be the place where I would like to start. Like, what would that look like if we were to make such a determination? Is this legislative sort of proposal? How would we shift? Because what I'm thinking is, right, I mean, if we shift this into a public service sort of priority, right, it doesn't mean that maybe there could not be rentals if somebody wants to do, a celebration or something like that. But that is not the primary purpose. The primary purpose is to serve the public, which has already paid taxes to build these facilities, in order for us to address especially areas that we have deemed to be important to our equity work. So that would be my first question. Has there been any sort of thought, given to what would that entail to make that shift? That would be my first question.
Well, I can say that especially when we were in the pandemic and we were realizing that we were so vulnerable with regard to the availability of space not being there once schools made the decision to close and other things made the decision to close. Additionally, we didn't have permits, so we didn't have money. So if we had not had our reserve fund, we would have been totally broke. I mean, zero. And I did start a conversation with the county attorney to ask, from a legislative legal standpoint, is there precedent, or is it even possible under our county charter and county laws to have a quasi where there's appropriated funding that supplements, the enterprise type model? And the answer I got was they weren't sure. I got a lot of answers too, like, well, it depends on, are there bonds involved with the facilities that you're talking about, and the bond rating and the bond structure would depend on, how you utilize it and whether it would be an appropriation, well, not appropriation, but a disposition of the property, depending on how you, I know that's a 2-year thing, but they were saying if you have extended use by similar groups for a long period of time, there could be some view that that would violate some of those provisions. So, because we do have regular users like cultural schools, for example, that every year they're in schools and they utilize an entire school for the entire school year. It's only on a Saturday, but that could be a disposition for that particular period of time if it's over, a long enough period of time. So I don't know the answer to your question, but I will say I had started the conversation because I had some serious concerns about our viability. I also started the conversation of, if we became quasi, would we be able to, for example, make relationships with outside entities such as gyms? Because there were private gyms that were coming to us saying we could host boxing for kids, or we could host, programs that in the past had been in MCPS facilities, that when those facilities were closed, you could do a shift to us, or we could run concurrent, because we always need gym space and field space and, other things. The answer I got from the county attorney's office was, you are established for the purpose of permitting county facilities, government facilities, which includes schools through the delegation through the Board of Ed. It does not include private entities. But that doesn't mean that if we become creative and, do some legal work, that we couldn't possibly develop a public-private relationship. I know we were looking at that with the early care. We were trying to find, for example, development space that is still being developed because they don't have a tenant, hasn't been built out, whatever the issue is, and have the childcare available there. But I don't know exactly what happened with that. That was a couple of years ago when I heard those discussions, but that's going to take some work, just like ours could take work, but it doesn't mean it can't be done.
Yeah, so I mean, to me, I think that's the priority, right? I mean, I do believe that as a council, we should start now to take a look. I mean, if it requires a charter amendment, that should be sort of ready to go. I mean, obviously, it's not going to be ready for this cycle, but it should be for the next. To literally look at how do we align something that is, again, so precious as a public facility, as an asset, align that to our needs. If there are jurisdictions that are doing it where they're not charging, I think I saw Fresno, California or something like that, there has to be examples of that. I can't, I don't know, in terms of bonds and things like that, it seems to me like, I mean, I would love to look into that because I don't know that it's so extensive that it would have such an issue. Disposition, I'm not really sure this would fall under that, but I think it would be worth for us on the council to start looking at that. And again, maybe have a subsequent session, I don't know, in the fall, but I think it should be joint GO EC to look at all of those types of issues and begin to move in that direction. Because again, at the end of the day, to me, it's just alignment. We just can't continue to do the same thing while we have an entire, population of 1.1 million people with a lot of different, needs, but also opportunities, and this is about leveraging that. So that would be my first thing. And then, of course, the other piece that I found really incredible is the whole issue of the fee study not being done since 2002. Again, so many things have changed since 2002. So I would love to have some sort of follow-up understanding on, how can we, get that done, and what this will mean. And Ms. Pearson, you mentioned the thing about the early care and education and looking at private space, et cetera. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know where those conversations are from the executive side, but we're going to have to do that. I mean, it's the only way. Kerwin also coming down the pike is the only way they're going to get these things done as well. But okay, so I mean, that would be sort of my take. I think if we start there, that we can at least have some options and some scenarios that we can look at and evaluate. So, thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Councilmember Navarro, and certainly, as chair, mea culpa, that is my bad. We certainly should have made this GO, and as you continue to talk about it, I whispered to Councilmember Jawando, and I was like, yeah, I don't know why I hadn't thought of that. This should definitely, because it expands so much beyond just what is with our Montgomery County Public School space. I know that's a lion's share of but because there's so many other government facilities that we have that we utilize, it certainly falls under the purview. So when we come back from recess, and I'd like to do it like when we come back from recess, we should have like that first week, we should have a joint committee meeting where we can start to discuss this. We would have had time then to start to discuss behind the scenes. Although we will be on recess, we can still talk about some of these recommendations, and we'll know by then definitively who our next folks will be from the Democratic side, at least, which typically flows into the, that's just looking at what history is, foretold. But from that standpoint, it will certainly help us to start to get an idea of what direction we should be looking at and headed in. So with that, let me turn to Councilmember Jawando. I did have one thing, but I'll wait till Councilmember Jawando.
Appreciate it. Thank you. And of the many things that have changed since 2002, I was graduating college. So just
thank you for that, Councilmember Jawando.
Just to make no problem.
The young buck on the committee.
So just example of changes. And I was going to ask about the study as well, but I think it said in here, if I read right, there is a new RFP out.
For the fee study,
Yes.
there is an RFP that Procurement has the RFP that was suspended in 2019, and we are expanding on that with the intent to issue in the fall.
Okay, so not out yet, but
Right. We're hoping to use some of the information or all of the information that our
Fellows.
summer fellows developed to inform that bid.
and just on that, since we're on, I'll start there. But who did it in 2002? What was the reason? When we went out in 19, what was? You just didn't. No one replied, or it was. What was the issue?
Well, when we put it out in 2019, it was at the very.
Right
It was
for
the
the
end of
pandemic.
2019, so it was very close to the beginning of COVID.
Yeah.
And we had two entities respond. Both of them were very small businesses. One of them was subsequently found not to actually be qualified, and the other one could not cover all of the areas that we needed covered.
Okay. All right, and then we kind of went into COVID. Okay.
Yes.
So hopefully now we'll be able to find somebody that could.
Yeah, and I also, that's another good outcome of meeting with Mr. Riley, Director Riley. He made me aware of contractors they have used in the past that have dealt with fields and parks, which very similar operations and functions, that may be interested, so we can solicit. The procurement office, once they develop the scope of work, will be able to reach out to potential bidders and say, hey, be aware, this is something that's coming, are you interested in it? And by having qualified potential bidders that we can reach out to, that will make our pool even larger, hopefully, for applicants for the process.
Yeah, okay, that's helpful. Yeah, and I think, there's a bucket of things here that are like, what can we do in the short term, to make things work a little better now? And then there's these more existential questions that are very, very important of like, who should you be? What should CUP do? What should the goal be? And so I'll start back out just to kind of pick up on something Councilmember Varro was talking about. I also think that, when I was looking at this and thinking about what you all do, it's really related to, like, I'm lead for libraries, like what we've done with the fees there. That it's a public service. There is, they charge a fee for a replace book or whatever, but again, that's not the focus. We're not dependent. If they don't make their fee quota, we're still going to fund libraries. And I think I see this as a similar public service, and I guess in that these facilities should be available to the public regardless of whether there's money available. So whether it's the quasi route or it's just actually a government entity, I want to, we can talk more about and we'll have to figure out. Do you think that, have you seen, and anyone can answer this, that our current structure has led to inequitable access in any way? And if so, how?
Well, I'll take a first stab and then I'll invite it to roll down the table. I think that there are a couple of inequities that we could look at. One is just generally the fee. If whatever we're charging could be it could be an impediment to a group. We found that when we were in the pandemic and we were able to come up with additional funding, for the first time, many groups got to use turf fields that they had never been able to use before. They either hadn't been able to get access because they couldn't get organized enough with enough kids to have enough money to get on the field, or they would miss out because by the time they got everything together, the period would be closed. Right. So that's one type of inequity. Another inequity is shortage of space, because we find there aren't enough fields, there aren't enough facilities, there are not enough gyms. You have leagues that need spaces, whether it's a field or a gym, and they get somewhat of a priority to the extent that they get in there, they're organized, they get it early, and they represent a larger percentage of the constituency, which somewhat justifies handling them a little differently. However, you do have the 5-man or 5-woman pickup game that, they're in the community. They just want a gym floor for a few hours, maybe every Monday night or whatever, and they get squeezed out. So, and then there's some communities that don't have ready access. because there may be some space, but it's not being utilized because there's not money to upkeep the field, or it's not zoned a certain way, or it's not developed as a open space. So those are the inequities that come to mind to me that exist under our current system.
Anyone else want to comment on that?
I did want to say that specifically, and this goes back to Chairman Rice's question about the sliding scale on fees for childcare. Our structure never allowed us to enforce anything like that. There was no contractual agreement between the county or MCPS and the childcare providers. We didn't have the ability to dictate anything like that. So MCPS developing an RFP and doing it as a procurement gives us that ability. And there are other inequities like that that would benefit the Title I and High Farms areas. We can combine schools, neighboring schools that are close together. They can have a combined program. If one has 10 kids and one has 13 kids, you've got 23 kids. That's a good program. If you don't have more than 20 kids, you can't sustain a program. It just isn't possible. You really want to have at least 30 kids. So there are those kinds of inequities that were in a lot of our systems and a lot of our fee structures that were developed over years and years and years of policy and software changes. Interestingly, I found a lot of the fees were developed based on how they fit in our software programs.
Right.
So, and they would change when we would go into something new and have different processes and different procedures. So the fact that we're actually going into a new software program right now gives us freedom to kind of revisit all of that again. So it's kind of well-timed as far as the fee study goes with our fellows and
Going into next year.
going into next year. Yeah.
Okay.
But there are definitely inequities that could be addressed. And large organizations have advantages. They're more organized. They can get fields. They can organize their coaches and have everybody apply for everything. And they can do different things that give them advantages because of that organization that smaller, less organized groups don't have.
So you're feeding into my next question, because we get calls, I'm sure that my colleagues have gotten. It's like, I just need to get on this field. I've never been able to get on every year. I try to, how can you help us? And while I can see the fee could exacerbate the inequity, it's not the sole reason. You've mentioned of others, people more organized, they know who to call, they've got the people.
Well, and it's not really the fee, because it's maybe $5 an hour
Right.
for a field.
Right.
If it's a school field.
Right.
And so but then you see the larger groups, this is what's frustrating to me. They'll charge hundreds of dollars for the children in their leagues. Well, it's not the children they're charging, but you know what I mean. And it's very frustrating. We just don't know. There's no way we can.
So my question is there's some staff talked about in here. So say we had a wholesale change and we get rid of the fees or change the way they're sliding scale, whatever we get to. Do you have the people power and the expertise and the software ability, to actually equitably administer it? How would you do that? In light of all these challenges, Yeah. Or at least, I'm not saying you solve it, but do you have initial ideas, right, about what else would need to be required to get to that place, right?
I don't know, because we have regular meetings with Mr. Driver on one particular field that's relatively new that we're put into circulation, trying to make sure it's equitable for the community that's right there. It's a very attractive
I know which field this is.
Yeah.
The field we're talking about.
That shall not be named, but at the same time, we've got to balance that with not only the community's use, but the need to upkeep and the health of that field. That's part of that inequity too, because you often see in communities where there's a high need, there's high use, and so then it doesn't stay up to standards, and then it's a vicious cycle. It's like, well, why don't we have the same quality that X community has? And we have to listen to that, and we also will get permits based on that. Oh, I don't want that field, even if it's available, because it doesn't look a certain way or have a certain amenity or whatever.
Well, yeah, I think so we have to think more about that question. If we're going to implement a new system, how do we, in the spirit of the law that Councilman Navarro championed and we all passed about, equity, how do we put a system in place that factors that into these decisions, at every stage of, fee, size of the organization, location, all those things. So, and there's got to be some best practices somewhere that are thinking about how to do that, and we should be on the cutting edge of it, because I think we all want to do it. It's just the question of what questions do we need to ask? Do you have the appropriate staff to monitor it? Is it a point-based system? How do we? We're not going to figure it out today, but I think that should be something that, as we're moving forward, we really prioritize. In addition to who we are, okay, but that is part of it. How do we decide? We're going to always have finite resources, and we should grow the pot. And I like the public-private idea. Frankly, I think that there are fields. I'm going to. I've been playing with for about 15 years a group of guys every Saturday morning, and we use most of the time use private based on connections or things. But there's gyms that are just around that I think people would be willing to put them into our system if we could figure out a way to do that. So we should grow the number. But even in that scenario, we're still going to have a list, and there's going to be more need. And so how do we equitably dole that out? I think that we need to have a process for that. So I just want to add that to the mix. Last thing, and then I'll turn it back to my colleagues. Going really small, back down to the kind of like micro, the mentioning of the comprehensive listing of everything. You acknowledge that there's things kind of all over the place. Do you have the ability to do that now to kind of condense that? Would you need more staff, or where's that?
Well, we could always use more staff.
I know everyone could.
I'm not going to turn that down. But I will say we have started trying to do it. It's more on a cloud basis of putting it all on our website, or putting it all through the active Montgomery. If you know how to query. But that's the thing. It's always if you know how.
Dice.
So and to say we're going to create a guide that's static, that's paper, that's kind of old school. So it's kind of a quandary. Bill, you've been working more with the new platform than I have.
I think it would have to be a combination, because we do still have old school people, and having that paper, and just doing something, I have my paper here, doing something concise on paper, it's not going to include everything. Our office manual and policy and procedure book is 400 pages long, so we aren't going to publish that for the public, but I mean, it's available for them to see online, but nobody's going to read through that to find what they're looking for, because it's too complex. But breaking it down into the basics for what people are looking for, I think, we can come up with something that's kind of an active, static document online and in paper form, in an active PDF kind of format that has active links and things like that we can print and publish.
The new system would allow you to, because now you can update PD, even if...
Well, even if new system, we should be able to link to it through the new system, but we could also, just have it right on the front page of our website. We have the county website. We haven't done a lot of work on it over the years. It's kind of sitting there and hasn't been, we update it with releases, and it connects to our blog and those things. But we can definitely work on doing that. It would help to have the communications person in-house.
Yeah, that's what I was
right
going to ask.
And that's I kind of think of those as going hand in hand, because that should be something under their purview and something that they should implement in their overall communication program. And as far as I'm concerned, I've some experience in that field in my past, so that's something that I think kind of goes together.
Yeah, job one is to have people understand what the rules are currently. We're talking about changing things, but what can I do now? How do I get to it? And having that easily available. Okay, well, this is something we could talk about all day, so I'm going to pause there. But I appreciate the work that's been done by OLO, and I'm looking forward to. I agree with the idea of coming back in the fall. I think with the joint committee, because I think there's a lot to discuss here, and it connects to a lot of what our residents expect as far as quality of life and ability to take advantage of everything in an equitable way. So, thank you.
Well, thank you very much to both my colleagues, Councilmember Navarro and Councilmember Jawando, for asking some really insightful questions that I think are going to help to shape some of the decision points that we have for this fall once we've had an opportunity to, like I said, get a little bit of a better idea of the lay of the land. Ms. Bell-Pearson, I just have some very specific just questions just to kind of dot the I's and cross the T's on the discussion so far. So the program specialist position, is that Mr. Davis's position that you're looking at that would be that changing to community outreach manager? That would be that one that you've...
No, it's a vacant position currently.
It's a vacant position right now, so that person would then become the community outreach manager. I'll just say this, that although there is a freeze on that, I would just caution us from not moving forward with this position, because as Councilmember Navarro and I were just discussing, when we're looking at the face of equity in our community outreach is a priority. It is a part of ensuring that we have that equity and social justice that is there. If we are not outreaching to community members and giving them the information that we just talked about was not a part of that clearinghouse document, we are not doing our job. And so from that standpoint, we can do better, we must do better. And so from that standpoint, that to me would be a priority. I know that I have an upcoming meeting with the county executive, I think next week, and I'll be bringing that up with my conversation with him. But if you could just impart to the CAO that we've had this discussion and that the committee feels as though this is something that is a priority for us moving forward, and would we certainly feel be a part of an exemption, that would certainly be the case, especially because as we're talking about some of the challenges that we're facing in our community right now, when we're talking about making sure that our children who are now out of MCPS schools are being able to be reached by many of the programs and things that are out there, that community organizers are able to put things in place, working with our street outreach network, with positive youth development organizations that are out there that see what's happening in the direction that our community is going in, where we're experiencing this rise in violence and rise in things that are happening, and we want to provide these opportunities for individuals. That's an opportune time for us to really say that we're doing our part. And so from that standpoint, I think that would be a priority for us. I do agree with Councilmember Jawando and Councilmember Navarro that this clearinghouse makes sense. I know that it's difficult. Not everyone will use it. Not everyone will know where that is, but we still have to do it, right? Because it's still something that for a lot of people, they will be able to use as a reference point. It will increase availability, and then it's up to us as elected officials, as folks in the community, to make sure, working with our community partners, that they understand and see what's there. I would just also say that part of your ever has group, so all those people who have ever utilized your system, sending out a mass email to them, pushing them that this is the new system and this is what we're utilizing and this is where our cloud-based information is, that's that clearinghouse. That's also a way to outreach. So again, something that the community outreach manager can be responsible for and certainly do. So, you know, those ever has always work well. If anybody ever has used your system before, outreaching to them gets the buzz going. It's better than a lot of other things you can do when it comes to outreach. And then last but certainly not least, and you heard Councilmember Navarro already talk about the fee study. I agree wholeheartedly that this needs to be done, and I know that you're in the works of doing it. It is important for us to get that started as soon as possible. So thank you, Director Riley, for referring some other entities that could possibly certainly fill the need for that fee study. But when it comes to before and after school childcare, and we now have the new entity that we stood up, we need to work in conjunction with them as well. And so when it comes to really focusing on childcare as a whole, being able to, you know, have that already existing now, I think we've already started to fill some of the slots. I'm not sure. We can find out what the status of that is for the entity with Montgomery moving forward. But it certainly is going to be important for us to work in conjunction, especially with our school system, because it is a priority. It is a key part of Kerwin and the blueprint, dealing with childcare and making sure that we have those spaces available. And schools are going to be an integral part, but it also speaks, Ms. Peterson, to what you said about the public and private, because in law we've enshrined that at least 50% will be private. And so having an entity that's able to delve into both of those spaces makes sense, not just from utilization of gyms and other specialized places, but also when it comes to the childcare aspect as well. And really working with, as we've spearheaded, looking at different kinds of innovative ways that we can focus on childcare, vacant spaces that are there now that we'll be able to try and utilize as they sit and lay dormant, but can serve our purpose now. And it's akin to, and I know it's not the same, but our revenue authority that is that quasi kind of entity is sort of a similar type of model. I know it's not the same for what it is that we're looking to do here, but it is similar in that respect. So I encourage us to possibly look at something like that as kind of a guiding light for us to maybe head in that direction. There is no question, and I will just say this from my perspective as a council member, I don't see a way in which CUP can continue in its current form and still adhere to the myriad of things that we're asking you to do. It is no longer possible. And so from that standpoint, I do think that it is time for us to talk about what that new iteration will be. If we are true to our focus on racial equity and social justice, the restrictions that are in place based on the organizational structure that you have now just doesn't make sense. And so from that to continue with that same model. And so from that standpoint alone, let alone all of the other items that were highlighted by OLO in terms of benefits for us in going to a different sort of structure, that just makes complete sense for us. So from that standpoint, I think that that's also one that we need to start thinking about during this summer time frame and figuring out staff working together with all of our entities about what something like that might look like. So I hope I've kind of summed up a lot of the points that we've heard from my colleagues and what I think our next steps are. Again, we will. The beautiful thing is we have the chair of GO right here, so I feel a little bit better that we haven't closed out the entire committee. Please apologize to your committee members. We'll make sure that we send these notes to them as well so that they have that as kind of a starting point for them, so they're not starting from scratch when they come into this next joint committee meeting. We can start talking behind the scenes as well about some of our thoughts and ideas, and of course from our partners. Obviously, now that you've heard where we think we may be headed, I don't expect you today to react and say, well, what about this, what about that? I know it's going to take time to digest and really start to think about what it is that makes sense, and please engage as you have been before, working with staff, working with our offices, to make sure that you let us know. This is something where, again, at the end of the day, as I heard Councilmember Navarro say it so succinctly, look, our goal is to make sure that taxpayer resources are being utilized in the best way for taxpayers, right? That's what it is. And so we've got to figure out the best way to ensure that our folks who are in our community are able to utilize these spaces that we've built with their dollars and are contributing overall to their well-being, to their ability to, start, do their businesses, whether they're, operating different kinds of clubs or sports programs or whatever the case may be, providing childcare in their businesses, all kinds of things. So we have multifaceted ways in which we're connecting with individuals in our community. And so we owe it to them to make sure that it's as streamlined as possible. It's never going to be perfect. None of it is. Private sector isn't. So it's always funny how we get a bad rap in government when private sector is nowhere close either. But that being said, just as you heard from Mr. DeFazio earlier, we can do better. And so I think that's what these recommendations are. And I think that overall, when we do all those things that we've talked about today, we'll get to a much better place when people will, again, always have complaints, but it'll be better. And that's what we're all hoping for. Yeah, please, Councilmember Joel.
Let me close this out. I meant to ask this. The MOU, you're working on it, you're talking about it. Do you have a sense of timeline to get that, so we know how we're handling, this year, next year?
Well, the MOU with MCPS is done for we're able to operate under for a year.
Okay.
It has 1 year one year extension to it, which would hopefully not be needed. The idea is to start when school starts back, because everybody's in a flux this summer and we're dealing with daily crises as summer camps are starting and things. But by this fall to start working on to finalize it. We were close. We'd already had some discussions. But I will tell you, it's twice the size of the one we extended, because the one we extended is almost a mirror copy of the one that expired, with some updates for new operations that we have. And things have changed so much that there's going to be a need to expand it. The one with parks, we've just started talking, so I can't say. I don't know. Do you have an idea?
Well, I think
Mr. Riley knows the right answer.
I think that's right. So maybe we can just add to the agenda in September to get a update on that, on where those are, because obviously we talked about that during budget, but we kind of parked it to the side and said we would come back to it. So, all right, thank you.
Any other comments? Parks, I know that you guys have, been doing a lot, so certainly wanted to give an opportunity, Mr. Riley, if you wanted to just let us know about how things are going with the structure between CUP and Parks. We have so many entities throughout this county that are represented, and I know that, being a consumer myself who's rented a number of spaces for birthday parties over the years, I've seen the good and the challenging that's associated, so certainly wanted to give you an opportunity.
Well, Councilmember Rice, I'll be brief. It sounded like you were winding it down. I was getting ready to walk out of the room, but thank you so much. And no offense, Councilmember Joanno, but it's nice to be addressing a different committee once in a while. I'm glad you're here. But so as far as Ramona noted, we had a good catch-up last week. We're going to knock out that MOU as soon as we can. I don't think ours is as complicated as the one with schools, but we have had some changes. We've all moved to Wheaton. Ramona's on the 9th floor. I'm on the 12th. So if we can't get together and work things out, we have some real issues. I think we'll just head to each other's office if we can't hammer through some of the details in the MOU. But I'm so glad you talked extensively about the need for this fee study. I am very focused on this. I completely agree it's needed. And to me, it's the bottom line. If I go back a decade or so during certain recessions, when we talked about fees with committees, it was about maximizing revenue. It was before the equity agenda. It was tax-supported money is hard to come by. You got to look at raising fees. We talked at one point about putting parking meters in Wheaton Regional Park. I'm so glad we didn't do that. But it's the study really, to me, it's simple in some way. Yes, we do want to maximize revenues to offset the need for tax-supported funding, but we want to make sure we don't create barriers for access and remove barriers for access, and make sure we're focused on equitable access to our 700 fields and the schools and parks and the spaces in the school buildings. So to me, that's kind of the heart of it, and I really am excited to partner with CUP on getting that study out and getting that study done. Most of my talks with the Fed committee and the council about CUP over the last few years have been my passion on getting these school fields in tip-top shape. We're almost there. There's a handful left. Thank you. This budget cycle, you did support our full request for a combination of GO bond money and some of the CUP fund balance money, but I can't leave without saying that is a real important passion of mine, to get those schools that are not receiving the care they need done. And then when I get pictures of Councilmember Joando at East Silver Springs sending me a picture of a field that is nothing we really want in our public. As you said, these are tax-built public assets. We need to take care of them. So I'll be talking to you in future budgets about how we're going to pay for that. And that's very related to a fee study, to the degree that fees can be used to do the capital and operating work on those school and park fields. Seems very appropriate to me. So thanks for letting me get a word in, and I will make sure Ramona and I work out that MOU and anything else that I can help to advance the recommendations of this study. We're here to help.
Well, thank you very much. No, I appreciate that. I think that, again, when we look at what it is that we're trying to accomplish, I know I've seen the work, Director Riley, that you've done. Councilmember Duando and I were just talking about Ridge Road and the investment there and working with the community and understanding that assets are incredibly important, but then they also cost a significant amount of money, and so it's tough to balance that with the affordability aspect, and that's where these fee studies come in. It is one, Ms. Bell-Pearson, that you highlighted when you talked about the fact of how much you charge versus how much entities charge. And so understanding that as a part of this fee structure as well, and saying, dictating that there's XYZ markup, now that's going to cause, and so folks who are watching today, be on notice that, the simple fact of the matter of you charging, you getting charged $5 for a rental of a field, but then charging individuals $100 each a pop for 20 or 25 people is not equitable. When those same people are the 20, 25 people who are county residents whose parents have paid into systems for a very long time. We need to start thinking about that. And especially for those parents who can't afford that $100. All of us, every single one of us who are parents have been on and had a team or to where you knew that there was a young person who couldn't afford it, and the parents got together to make sure that that person could be a part of that team. I see nodding heads because I know it's true. I've seen it, personally done it, personally gone to, back when, we had the Dick's Sporting Goods and bought uniforms for young girls who couldn't afford it. These are the kinds of things that happen all the time. It shouldn't always fall on the parents. Our businesses need to be partners with us in terms of making sure that that equity and affordability is there. Something that Councilmember Navarro has been talking about for a long time when we talked about the whole cost of these facilities. So we've lowered the cost to the person who's actually getting the space. Now we need to make sure that that then goes to the individuals who are paying those people who have reserved that space. That's the next step for us, right? So anyway, I really just want to say thank you to all of our partners who've continued to work in this direction. Ms. Bell-Pearson, we know it has not been easy. And we know that transition is always difficult as well. And so we stand ready to work with you and the entity and making sure that we can take us to that next level. We appreciate the partnership between Montgomery County Public Schools, between parks, all coming together to make sure that we can do everything we can to deliver on that vision. So I don't see any other notes from my colleagues or from staff, so we will certainly follow up with the next meeting immediately when we return in the fall and see what more we can do about progress. So with that, we are adjourned. Thank you very much, guys. Appreciate it. Take care and stay safe.